In ancient Rome, a wedding was far more than a celebration. It was a transfer of power, a moment when a young woman was taken from the world she knew and placed under the absolute authority of her husband as household. The Romans didn't hide this structure. They built an entire system of rituals that made sure every bride understood her new place before she even crossed the threshold of her new home. Her identity, her emotions, and even her behavior during the ceremony were tightly controlled, not by choice, but by expectation. The Roman world believed that a woman should enter marriage in a state of symbolic defeat, not partnership, and through generations. Families perfected rituals that turned a wedding into a public display of obedience. Before we go any further, I'd like to ask something before proceeding. Let me know from which part of the world you are watching this video. Your answers help me understand how far these stories travel today. From the moment a Roman bride woke on her wedding day, she was no longer treated as herself. Her appearance changed entirely. Her hair was arranged in a style copied from Rome's ancient priestesses, a reminder that she was entering a life ruled by discipline and expectation. Her clothing, too, was chosen not for beauty, but for symbolism, the flame-colored veil. The woolen belt tied in a knot she couldn't untie herself, and she was meant to suggest modesty. None of this was accidental. Every detail reinforced the idea that her future no longer belonged to her. One of the earliest and most unsettling parts of the ceremony was the mock capture. This tradition came from Rome's legendary past, when brides were said to be taken by force. Even centuries later, the symbolism remained. The bride was expected to show a small amount of reluctance, a stage hesitation that demonstrated purity, modesty, and submission. Families treated this as essential. If a bride appeared too willing, it was seen as a flaw in her character, something that could reflect poorly on both families. The ritual resistance didn't physically harm her, but it forced her to participate in an act that implied she had no agency in the union. After this, she was led through the streets in a public procession. Roman weddings were not private affairs. Neighbors, relatives, and strangers watched her walk, each step reminding her that marriage was not a personal decision, but a civic event. Her dowry, her husband's status, and her family's reputation were all silently on display. People commented on her posture, her expression, even her hesitation. In this moment, the bride was not seen as an individual. She was a symbol, and the crowd judged whether she played her role correctly. One of the most emotionally demanding expectations placed on a bride was ritual weeping. Roman culture believed a woman should mourn the end of her childhood and her separation from her family. Brides were encouraged, and sometimes pressured, to shed tears, even if their marriage was arranged with care or affection. This was not simply sadness. It was a demonstration of obedience to tradition. Her tears told everyone watching that she accepted her fate, that she understood she was leaving behind the home that once protected her. For many women, this was the most painful moment of the day. The ceremony required her to publicly display vulnerability, whether she felt it or not. By the time the procession reached the groom's door, the rituals became even more symbolic. The bride was not allowed to step through the entrance on her own. She had to be lifted over the threshold, not because it was graceful, but because Rome believed misstep or hesitation could bring misfortune. Being carried removed the risk of her faltering, but it also reinforced the idea that she was being taken into the house, not entering as an equal. The doorway was more than just a physical boundary. It marked the end of her former identity. Inside the home, further ritual awaited her. The new husband performed a gesture in which he parted her hair using a spear or spear-shaped tool. Not violently, but firmly enough to remind everyone present that Roman marriage had its roots in conquest and power. To the Romans, this symbolized a union protected by strength, but too many brides. It carried an unspoken message about dominance within the household. Historians debate how literal or symbolic this gesture was, but even in its most restrained form, It emphasized the authority the husband held from the very beginning. Another custom required the bride to offer fire and water to her new husband. On the surface, it appeared gentle and meaningful, a sign that she would contribute to the home's well-being. But beneath the symbolism lay a much deeper expectation. She was now responsible for maintaining the household, managing food, supervising servants, and upholding moral standards. Her role was set before she had even spoken her first words inside the home. For the rest of her life, she would live under the watchful eyes of her husband's family, judged by how well she fulfilled duties she did not choose. Even her name changed. A Roman bride often took on a version of her husband's family name, leaving behind the one she carried since birth. This change wasn't a simple formality. It represented a complete transfer of identity. Her legal standing shifted entirely to her husband or his father. In many cases, she could not own property, make decisions about her children, or protect her own interests without permission. Marriage erased much of who she was, and Roman society believed this was necessary for stability. Throughout the evening, guests watched her silently, evaluating every gesture. Was she modest enough, quiet enough, respectful enough? Brides were expected to keep their eyes lowered, speak softly, and avoid drawing attention. Their silence was praised as virtue. Their discomfort was treated as tradition. The ceremony was not meant to reassure or comfort her. It was designed to demonstrate her acceptance of a life where her behavior would always be measured. These rituals were not hidden or unusual. They were repeated for centuries, shaping the lives of countless women across the Roman Empire. And while some families softened these customs, others enforced them rigidly, believing that a strong marriage required a clear display of dominance and submission from the very beginning. This was the world Roman brides entered, a world where tradition outweighed personal desire, where symbolism overshadowed emotion, and where a young woman's wedding day was less a celebration and more a test of how well she would obey the expectations placed upon her. Once the ceremony ended and the guests had finished their celebrations, the atmosphere around the bride shifted again. The public display was over, but the expectations placed upon her were not. She now entered the most private and symbolic stage of the ritual, a step that carried more social pressure than anything that had happened earlier in the day. In Roman society, a bride's first night in her new home was not viewed through a lens of intimacy or romance. Instead, it was treated as a continuation of the ceremonial transfer of authority. The pressure surrounding this moment didn't come from what happened behind closed doors, but from what the household expected afterward. A bride was judged on how she carried herself, the modesty she displayed, and the impression she made the following morning. Her reputation, and sometimes her family's honor, could rest on a few silent observations. There was an unspoken understanding that the bride must show no signs of resistance to her new life, yet also refrain from appearing overly confident or bold. The balance was delicate. The household, especially female relatives of the groom, paid attention to how she walked, how she addressed others, and how she handled her new responsibilities. They believed her behavior on the first night and the day after revealed the kind of wife she would become. This scrutiny wasn't meant to harm her physically, but it was a form of psychological pressure that many women found daunting. She was expected to instantly adapt to a home she barely knew, surrounded by people who evaluated her as though she were a living emblem of tradition. The weight of those expectations could be overwhelming, especially for brides who had been raised in completely different environments. Another part of the tradition involved the bride sitting beside the hearth early the next morning, a symbolic gesture that confirmed her place as part of the household. The fire represented permanence and duty, and by sitting quietly beside it, she demonstrated her willingness to submit to the routines and responsibilities expected of her. This moment was often quiet, but it was filled with meaning. She was expected to appear composed, even if her emotions were far from calm. In many aristocratic families, older women gathered around her in those early hours. They asked gentle questions, encouraged modest answers, and watched carefully for anything that seemed out of place. Their judgment could influence the household's opinion of the bride for years to come. A single gesture could be misinterpreted as pride, defiance, or weakness. While no harm was intended, the pressure to conform could feel suffocating. The bride's integration into the home continued throughout the day. She was shown the storerooms, the servants, and the areas she would oversee. Her new responsibilities were outlined. Sometimes in great detail, Roman women played a central role in managing domestic affairs. But they were granted this authority only if the household trusted their discipline. The first days were a test of her attentiveness, her humility, and her ability to maintain composure under scrutiny. Some families also performed a ritual meal, where the bride and groom shared specific foods meant to symbolize prosperity, unity, and fertility. The meal itself was not the challenge. It was the silent expectations surrounding it. The bride had to show gratitude, restraint, and respect, all while navigating unfamiliar family dynamics. Every bite she took, every polite smile she offered, was part of a performance she had no choice but to perfect. These customs built a psychological framework that shaped the bride's new life. She learned from the beginning that her actions carried consequences far beyond herself. A wrong word could be taken as disrespect. A misinterpreted gesture could be seen as a flaw in her upbringing. Even genuine nervousness could be interpreted as weakness. In Rome's upper classes, where reputation carried enormous weight, these expectations could determine how she was treated for years. The long-term implications of these rituals were significant. By conditioning a woman to accept scrutiny, silence, and obedience from the very beginning of her marriage, Roman society reinforced the belief that a wife's role was secondary. Even when she held great responsibility within the household, she was expected to maintain dignity, while adapting to a life she had no part in designing. For many brides, the transition was emotionally challenging. Even if they eventually found stability or affection in their new homes, Roman marriage rituals, despite their elegance on the surface, carried an undercurrent of control that shaped the lives of countless women. These customs were designed to teach discipline, ensure loyalty, and display family power. Some brides accepted these traditions with quiet determination. Others struggled under their weight, but all were shaped by them. Whether they came from humble origins or the highest levels of society, as centuries passed, later generations softened or abandoned some of these practices. They recognized how harsh the symbolism could be, how the emphasis on dominance overshadowed the human side of marriage. But even as Rome evolved, the echoes of these rituals continued to influence the structure of households and expectations placed upon women. Today, these stories remind us that history often hides its darker layers beneath elegant traditions and celebrated customs. What appears graceful from a distance can feel entirely different for those who lived through it. And behind every Roman wedding, no matter how grand, stood a young woman navigating rituals that tested her strength, her identity, and her spirit. Thank you for exploring this hidden part of ancient history with me. If you want more deep dives into the forgotten and unsettling traditions of past civilizations, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share which ancient culture you'd like me to uncover next. Your support helps bring these stories back into the light, where they can finally be understood and never forgotten.